When work became personal again, there's a moment when work stops being something you do and starts becoming something you feel. A moment when effort carries emotion, and results feel connected to identity rather than obligation. This story begins at that moment, the point where work became personal again. For a long time, they had learned to keep distance, do the job well, stay professional, don't attach too much meaning. That approach made work manageable, even successful, but over time, distance turned into disconnection. The work was efficient, polished, respectable, and empty. In a world where productivity is praised above presence, this story matters because it explores what happens when people reconnect emotionally with what they create. The change didn't arrive through burnout or crisis. It arrived through awareness. They noticed how little they felt about their outcomes. Wins barely registered. Losses passed quickly. Everything existed in a neutral zone that protected them from disappointment, but also from fulfillment. The safety of detachment had quietly erased passion. At first, they assumed this was maturity. That caring less was part of growing up. But a different truth emerged. They hadn't become wiser. They had become guarded. Somewhere along the way, they stopped allowing work to matter to them because caring made failure feel risky. The realization surfaced during a moment of unexpected pride. They completed a piece of work that reflected their values, not just their skills. The feeling surprised them. It was deeper than satisfaction. It was connection. They saw themselves in the result. And for the first time in years, they cared deeply whether it succeeded. That moment unsettled them, in a good way, because it revealed something they had forgotten. Work doesn't drain us when it becomes personal. It drains us when it doesn't. And that realization would soon force them to reconsider how they approached effort, risk, and meaning moving forward. Once they felt that connection, it changed how they viewed everything else. The distance they had maintained for years suddenly felt artificial. They began noticing how often they had protected themselves by not caring too much, by keeping their work technically strong, but emotionally neutral. It was safer that way. Detachment reduced disappointment, but it also reduced meaning. The conflict surfaced immediately. Making work personal meant vulnerability. It meant risking failure in a way that couldn't be brushed off. If the work reflected who they were, then rejection would feel personal too. That fear had quietly shaped their habits for years, steering them toward roles and projects that demanded competence but not conviction. They saw it clearly now. Every time they avoided attachment, they avoided growth. The most meaningful work they had ever done, the work that stayed with them, was the work they cared about deeply. Yet they had slowly trained themselves to avoid that intensity in the name of balance and professionalism. The tension grew as they experimented with letting themselves care again. They invested more attention, took more ownership, allowed their values to influence decisions. The work felt heavier, also more alive. Success mattered more. Failure stung more. And that emotional range unsettled them. Part of them wanted to retreat back into detachment, back to safe effort and low stakes. But another part recognized the truth. Numbness had never protected them. It had only muted them. The discomfort they felt now was not danger. It was engagement returning. The conflict reached a turning point when they realized something simple and profound. The work they feared caring about was the same work capable of fulfilling them. Avoiding attachment had kept them functional, but disconnected. Reclaiming it meant accepting risk, but also meaning. And once it became clear, there was no unfeeling way forward. Work had become personal again, and that changed the stakes completely. Allowing work to become personal intensified everything. The emotional range widened, and with it came a new kind of pressure. When effort reflects identity, every decision carries weight. Every outcome feels closer. The work no longer belonged to a role. It belonged to them. And that closeness stirred fear they hadn't felt in years. The conflict showed up most clearly in moments of exposure. Sharing ideas before they felt perfect. Committing to projects that mattered deeply. Letting others see not just what they could do, but what they believed. Each act of openness felt risky. Detachment had once provided armor. Now, that armor was gone. Doubt resurfaced with force. What if caring made them reckless? What if emotion clouded judgment? What if attachment led to disappointment they couldn't easily shake off? These questions pulled them toward old habits, polish over honesty, safety over sincerity. The temptation to retreat was real. The tension reached its peak during a critical moment. A piece of work they believed in was evaluated openly. Feedback arrived, some encouraging, some critical. In the past, this would have rolled off easily. Now it landed deeply. For a brief moment, they questioned whether reconnecting emotionally had been a mistake. But something unexpected happened. Instead of shutting down, they leaned in, they listened, they refined, they defended what mattered and released what didn't. The work improved, not because it was protected, but because it was engaged with fully. Caring didn't weaken them. It sharpened them. That moment marked the emotional turning point. They realized that vulnerability wasn't a liability. It was a filter. It clarified what deserved effort and what didn't. It exposed weak ideas quickly and strengthened strong ones through honest friction. Detachment had hidden mistakes. Engagement revealed them early. In that realization, fear loosened its grip. They understood that making work personal didn't mean losing objectivity. It meant bringing intention into the process. And intention, they discovered, was the missing ingredient that turned effort into something lasting. The conflict didn't disappear, but it transformed into commitment. Commitment changed the texture of their work. They no longer aimed for distance or safety. They aimed for honesty. Effort became deliberate. Choices carried meaning. The work felt heavier, but it also felt grounded, rooted in values rather than fear. What followed was not constant success, but consistent growth. Some projects failed. Some ideas didn't land. But each outcome taught them something real. Because the work was personal, the lesson stayed. They didn't bounce off the surface. They shaped judgment, taste, and direction. Progress became less about speed and more about depth. Over time, others began to notice the difference. Not because the work was louder, but because it was clearer. There was intention behind it, conviction, a sense that the person behind the work stood fully behind what they were creating. Trust grew, not through perfection, but through authenticity. Looking back, they understood why work had felt empty for so long. They had been protecting themselves from disappointment by refusing to care. But fulfillment had always required risk. Caring meant exposure. It meant accepting that some things would fail, and choosing to show up anyway. When work became personal again, it stopped being draining. It became sustaining. It gave energy instead of consuming it. It connected effort to identity in a way that made even difficult days feel worthwhile. And that was the lesson they carried forward. Meaning doesn't come from distance. It comes from engagement, from allowing yourself to care enough that the outcome matters. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. When